What's up, 49er faithful, red and gold crazies, 49er fans all over the place? You are hanging with the Niner Nut, and this episode is going to be something special. I will be talking about a certain player in this episode, something I like to do from time to time to just break things up from the, modern day sports news, modern day 49er news, change it up a little bit and focus on a certain player that either is currently playing or that played for the 49ers in the past. And today I'm talking about one of my favorite players of all time and one of the greatest of all 49ers of all time, the great Jeff Garcia. For all you that are not familiar with Jeff Garcia and call yourself 49er fans, do yourself a favor. Go back in time somehow, look at YouTube and just put his name in. And I'm sure you will see one of the most memorable 49er moments, in my opinion, probably one of the greatest comebacks in NFL history, one of the greatest comebacks in 49er history, the 2002 playoff game against the New York Giants in the stick, baby. Going back to the stick. Oh, yeah, man. It was probably by far one of the most exciting and stressful games to watch as a fan. I cannot imagine what it was like for Jeff Garcia and the 49ers playing that game because whew, I was all over the place, man, during that game. They were down, I think, at one point. Was it 38, 35, 14 to the Giants, and they climbed themselves back. Garcia just went off in that game, man. So very, very interesting. Definitely check that out if you can. If you've never seen that before. Or, you know what I like to do sometimes now? I like to go back in time and watch a lot of these great games that happened. And it's one of those games that just sticks out in 49er history, I think. It's got to be. If we were going to do a 49er time capsule of the greatest games, that would definitely be in there by far. So, in talking about Jeff Garcia, I just want to take everybody back a second, just to get a better picture of the way things were. Let's go back to 1998, which was a time when the 49ers were 12-4 that season under head coach Steve Mariucci. Of course, Steve Mariucci had come in and replaced the great George Seifert, and Steve Mariucci did a phenomenal job as a head coach. Um, there were a lot of questions about him when he came in to do the job. Obviously, he was filling in some extremely big shoes in George Seifert, and of course, the great Bill Walsh before that. But lo and behold, he did a phenomenal job, put together a wonderful team. At this time, the offensive coordinator was the great Marty Mortonwig. Defensive coordinator was John Marshall. Other assistants that were part of this team were Greg Knapp, Bill McPherson, Jim Mora, and Richard Smith. And this was under the ownership of the great Edward D. Bartolo Jr. The great Edward D. Bartolo Jr. General manager and director of football operations was the late, great Dwight Clark. So, you're talking about a team that was riding high, an organization that was really riding high. And again, I said 1998, they had a phenomenal season, 12-4. For those of you that do not remember, they opened that season with a very memorable win against the New York Jets, an overtime win. If you get the chance, please go back and YouTube that game if they have it, or go and YouTube the great overtime run by Garrison Hurst, who tramples various Jets on his way for the winning touchdown. It was an amazing game. In fact, I remember watching that game. I was visiting a buddy of mine who was up in Boston College there, and I stayed back while they all went to drink to watch the game because I'm a Niner nut, and I sure shit ain't gonna miss opening day. And back here in New York, my father is a huge Jet fan, and I remember calling him right after the game, trying to rag him a little bit, and he just hung the phone up on me. So, but that season they were riding high. They went 12-4. That was that was a really good team. Okay, if you look at the roster of that team, let's just go back and look at the roster. Steve Young was the quarterback. He was 11-4 as a starter that year. He was 37 years of age, and also too, this was coming at a time when, unfortunately, he was absorbing a lot of hits to some extent, and he had the concussions that we saw unfortunately happen to him towards the end of his career. But that year, he had thrown for 4,170 yards, 36 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. The great Garrison Hurst, like I had mentioned, had 1,570 yards. There was Terry Kirby, Chuck Levy, Mark Edwards. We had the wonderful trio of the greatest wide receiver ever, Jerry Rice. You had Terrell Owens. You had J.J. Stokes, Herb Smith, Greg Clark. So Fred Beasley, great fullback, man. And on the defensive side of the ball, phenomenal trio of Chris Dolman, the late, great Chris Dolman, and Roy Barker. Of course, Bryant Young, Jr. Bryant, the great Tim McDonald, the great Ken Norton Jr., Winfred Tubbs, Tony Peterson, the great Merton Hanks, Brenston Buckner, Jeff Posey, the great Lee Woodall, and so on and so forth. So this was a phenomenal team. Okay. Um, well talented team all around, man. Now, if you also remember that season, okay, they had gone into the playoffs and faced the Green Bay Packers. Okay, this is a Green Bay Packer team that, when I talk about Green Bay Packers of '98, I'm talking about Brett Favre, the great Brett Favre, Antonio Freeman, Dorsey Levens, and so on, and Ryan Longwell was their kicker. But they had drew them in the playoffs, the wild card round of the playoffs, and again, one of the great 49er victories of all time. It ended uh, with the touchdown pass from Steve Young to Terrell Owens. It is memorable. Please go and YouTube that if you can, if you have not, if you weren't alive at the time and you know nothing about that game, go back and check that out. That was '98. I just wanted to kind of give everybody, just a bird's eye view of where I was coming from, where I'm coming from with Mr. Jeff Garcia. The next season of '99, things, of course, started to go downhill. The Niners were 4-12 that year. Now, that was also the season in which we saw the change happening. Obviously, if you remember, against the Arizona Cardinals on Monday night was when Aeneas Williams put that monster hit on Steve Young, which pretty much ended his career. He had that severe concussion, and therefore he never played another game, unfortunately. From that point on, things just seemed to go downhill for the Niners. It was a really tough season altogether. And it was that season of '99 that you would see the first of Jeff Garcia. Okay. And interestingly enough, just some background information on Garcia. Of course, he had gone to San Jose State. He was undrafted, unfortunately, which I still cannot even. I can't believe that for a guy who was so talented. And it's funny. So many times in sports, we see these wonderful stories from these wonderful players who have a similar background. When I think of Jeff Garcia, I think of the great Kurt Warner, because I feel that both of them had careers that were intersecting of each other. They both had a similar background, and they both went on to do phenomenal things, of course. So we see a lot of players, for whatever the case may be, that start off at a certain point, and then go upwards, as Jeff Garcia did. Not drafted, out of San Jose State. He goes and plays with the Calgary Stampeders, okay, from '94 to '98. And then he comes to the 49ers in '99, of course. And, interestingly enough, he was very successful with the Calgary Stampeders. Um, he is actually on the Stampeders Wall of Fame, okay, which he was named to in September of 2012. He was given the Jeff Nicklin Memorial Trophy in '97, which is an award given to the most outstanding player in the CFL Western Division. Okay, and there's so many other wonderful things he did with that team. He also led the team to the Grey Cup in 1998 and was named Grey Cup MVP. So, again, had a wonderful career playing for the Calgary Stampeders. And then, of course, in the season of 99, he's signed by the 49ers as a backup to Steve Young. Okay. Again, which was a very interesting season, if you remember that, because they also had another quarterback on the roster called Steve Stenstrom. Things didn't work out there with Steve Stenstrom. And eventually, Jeff Garcia was the starter. Now, if you were watching at the time, which I was, I actually have all the games on tape, believe it or not. You saw this guy had a lot of talent. Okay, a few of the things that I always loved about Garcia was that he was extremely cerebral type of quarterback. I think he had a great knowledge for the offense, with which he was in. He had a great knowledge of the position, a great handle on the offense. Again, was a dual threat because he could run out of the backfield. He was mobile and he could throw the ball. Now, you know, being that he was only 6 feet tall, some would say that was rather tiny or rather small for a quarterback, but we have seen that is not the case at all. We've seen quarterbacks similar size, such as the great Drew Brees, and even smaller, and Doug Flutie, and both of them had gone on to do wonderful things. So none of that really mattered for Jeff Garcia. What I always loved about him most was his heart, his hustle, and he played this game fearlessly. All guts and heart, man. Now, again, if you don't know what I'm talking about and you did not have the luxury of watching him play, please go back and check out a lot of his highlights, and you will see that I'm correct about what I'm talking about. Also, in the '99 season, you saw him getting better every game. Okay, you saw again. You had to have been watching carefully to see the improvements happening. One of the games that comes to mind was a loss to the Cincinnati Bengals. It was a 44-30 loss, December 5th, 1999, against the Bengals. And again, it was kind of a back and forth game because there were a lot of yards. Both teams were, obviously doing damage to one another. The 49ers had 437 yards through the air. Bengals had 334. And I remember watching that game, and that was one of the games where I was extremely impressed with Jeff Garcia. His numbers, 33 of 49, 437 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. And again, I think from there, he really started to solidify himself as the next quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. And what I mean by that is not just the next quarterback, I'm talking about for the future. And obviously, we saw that stick. The season of 2009ers improved to 6-10. They were sort of going through a rebuilding phase to some extent, I guess, if you want to call it that. On that roster, of course, was Rick Myra. They had Tim Rattay. Charlie Garner was the running back. Okay. Still had that wonderful trio of Owens, Rice, J.J. Stokes. Ty Streets was on that team. Defensively, Ahmad Plummer, Jason Webster, Pearson Prelude, Julian Peterson, a name from the past, Zach Bronson, Chaiki O'Keefe, one of my favorite Niners of all time, John Engelberger, man. I really, really, really liked him, man. He had a lot of heart. So they were getting better. And again, being a Niner nut, I never miss a game, man. I have so many games on tape. It's disgusting. One of these days, I'm going to get around to like converting them over the DVD. Although I don't even think I need to do that anymore. With the technology being the way it is, I can probably find these games for the most part somewhere out there in the technology universe. But they were getting better. It's still under Coach Steve Mariucci. You saw them making strides. And again, Garcia had an extremely solid season in his second run. Now, something I left out, which is most very important, he became a starter at the age of 29, which is a time in certain players' careers where sometimes, I guess they want to consider that to be old, which we obviously know is not old. But I guess in the football world, it can be, because if you're playing from when you're drafted, maybe at 22, 23, sometimes even younger, maybe a little older at times, you have some seasons in you. And depending on being a quarterback, the hits you absorbed, the wear and tear of the game, the extreme physicality of the game, it can, of course, wear on you, which is understandable, makes a lot of sense, understandable. But again, that was always a very interesting aspect. And in his second season, his numbers were phenomenal. He threw for 4,278 yards, 31 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 97.6 rating, 63.3 completion percentage rate. Okay. Also, 414 yards on the ground, averaging 5.8 yards per carry, 4 touchdowns. Again, Garcia was just all heart. Named to the Pro Bowl that year. 4-time Pro Bowl guy he was. All heart. Had a wonderful rapport with Terrell Owens. Owens that year, 97 catches, 1,451 yards for 13 touchdowns. Okay, so they were getting better. And it was in a very short time that they did so under the great Jeff Garcia. Okay, now moving on to the 2001 season, they were 12-4. All right. Obviously had taken giant strides. You go from 6-10 to 12-4, second in place in the NFC West Division under the great Steve Mariucci, losing the wild card game to the Green Bay Packers 25-15, but a phenomenal season all around. Garcia once again 12-4 as a starter, 62.7 completion percentage rate, 3,538 yards, 32 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, 94.8 rating, 254 yards on the ground, and 5 touchdowns. That was, again, a season in which he and Terrell Owens were a dynamic duo. Owens, 93 catches, 1,412 yards, 16 touchdowns. Man, that was a great year, man. All right. So again, Niners were rolling, man. And they lose to a very good Green Bay Packer team, of course. Okay. I'm talking about a Green Bay Packer team that was, of course, still had Brett Favre, Bubba Franks, still had Antonio Freeman, Amon Green. Very, very good, very good Green Bay Packer team. Head coach was Mike Sherman at the time. Okay, I remember that game down in Lambeau Field too that they lost. Tough loss, but the team was improving. And then, of course, came the wonderful year of 2002, like I mentioned earlier, where they won probably one of the most memorable games in 49er history. I think it was, my opinion, the greatest comeback I've ever seen. Now, of course, there's always going to be those who don't agree. I'm sure that, obviously in terms of comeback, we're talking about the Houston Oilers come back against the Buffalo Bills down 35-3, led by Warren Moon. Yeah, that was a phenomenal comeback. But this one, there was nothing like this comeback in 2002. Now, quick, funny side story about this game. So at the time, I was the head coach of a CYO boys basketball team. And unfortunately, the game took place around the same time as the 49ers were playing the Giants. I was able to see, I think, the first and second quarter of the game, and then I had to go coach, and the game lasted about an hour. And unfortunately, by that time, the Giants had taken the lead and were well ahead, and it looked like things weren't going to work out for the 49ers in that game. So I'm on the sidelines feeling bad, and, there's nothing worse than losing to the New York Giants, especially when you're a 49er nut like I am, and all your friends are Giant fans because you live in New York, and they're calling you and ragging you and all this stuff. So in the third quarter, the Giants go up 38-14. Now, they were slowly pulling away. Amani Toomer caught 2 touchdown passes from Kerry Collins to make it 28-14. Tiki Barber had a 6-yard run, made it 35-14. So they're pulling away. Matt Bryant kicks a field goal, make it 38-14. But lo and behold, the greatest comeback in history would happen. So I'm on the sidelines coaching my team. Now, there's a father, one of the fathers for one of the kids I was coaching at the time was in the other room keeping an eye on the game. So I remember him running over to the sidelines telling me the 49ers scored. It's 38-22, okay? And then running over to me and telling me the 49ers scored again. It's 38-30. Thank God. So I'm jumping up and down out of my shoes, out of my skin with excitement, man. And thank God that game ended for me to see the rest of the game, which, again, YouTube this. Jeff Garcia led the greatest comeback that there was. All right. Down 38-14, he throws a 26-yard touchdown pass to Terrell Owens. Then he completes the 2-point conversion to make it 38-22. In the early moments of the fourth quarter, Garcia runs for a 14-yard touchdown. Okay, then again, 2-point conversion to Terrell Owens, 38-30. Jeff Chandler kicks the field goal, 38-33. And then, of course, Ty Street's 13-yard pass from Jeff Garcia to make it 39-38. Everybody who knows what I'm talking about will remember how this game ended. Trey Junkin messed up the snap trying to snap the ball to Matt Bryant. Never got the kickoff. History was made. Niners win. Okay? What a game. Please go back and watch the game. I cannot stress enough. Garcia had great numbers. 27-44, 331 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, 60 yards on the ground, led the 49ers in rushing, had the longest run of the day, 14 yards. Okay? If you weren't a 49er fan and you weren't too familiar with Jeff Garcia, this was the game that people started to really open their eyes to him. Now, if you were a 49er fan, like myself, of course, like so many others, you knew that, hello, where have you people been? This guy's legit. And then some. Unfortunately, they went on to lose to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 31-6 in the division round. But that was the Tampa Bay Buccaneer team that went on to win the Super Bowl under head coach John Gruden. So that was a really good team, man. But again, Garcia had solidified himself as the next great 49er quarterback. And I still say that to this day. I don't care what anyone says. As a 49er fan, we have been blessed to have phenomenal quarterbacks. Obviously, the greatest of all time, in my opinion. I don't care what anyone says. Joe Montana, number 16. Steve Young, number 8. Jeff Garcia, number 5, and so on and so forth. And, of course, John Brody there, too. But Jeff Garcia is on that list. I don't care what anybody says. He is on that. He is part of that special group. Now, the next season, for whatever reason, Steve Mariucci was not the head coach. Dennis Erickson was the head coach. That was a move I still never understood. Okay, so we saw things changing around. I'm sure that had a big hand in the reason why the Niners went 7-9 that year. They were just a totally different team. I think the way they looked, if you remember. Um, and again, this was a team that consisted of Kevin Barlow and Garrison Hurst with a running back duo. You had Jamal Robertson, Arnez Battle, Cedric Wilson, Jed Weaver, Brandon Lloyd, Aaron Walker, just to name a few. On the defensive side of the ball, we had the great Derek Smith, another phenomenal player. One of the great 49ers, man. One of the best linebackers ever, in my opinion. The great Tony Parrish, one of my favorite players of all time. Phenomenal athlete, great safety. Jeff Ulbrich, I'm sorry if I'm messing up his name. For those of you not familiar with Jeff Ulbrich, he is now the defensive coordinator for the New York Jets under ex-defensive coordinator Robert Saleh. Zach Bronson, Travis Kirchke, Andre Carter, Chidi Anahautu, veteran, had a really, really nice run with us. So the bowling ball, Anthony Adams on that team. A lot of talent on this team. But I never understood the move to head coach. But Garcia, once again, solid numbers. Okay. He missed some time with injury that year. 2,704 yards, 18 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. Again, when I talk about injury and Jeff Garcia, let me just be the first to say this guy, when I said before that he was fearless, I remember a couple of segments. I think it was Monday Night Football, I want to say, and I could be wrong. I think it was Chris Collinsworth. I'm not sure. But I remember Garcia not sliding with his feet out and going head first and taking a shot, but getting right up. And I think it was Collinsworth going, this guy's got to learn to slide. He was fearless. Now, Garcia also played in a time when football was no joke. Okay? And he played the game, like I've said before, fearlessly. He took it to the defender. That's one of the things I always loved about him the most. I always felt that he had so much heart. He was one of the players at the time in the league that I think did so much on heart. And again, like it tied into his story so well. Here's a guy not drafted, has a lot of great success for the Calgary Stampeders, goes on to make the 49ers, get signed, become the starter, help them ascend up the charts from 4-12 to 6-10 to 12-4, deep into the playoffs, ripping it apart on the stats, making the Pro Bowl 4 times. I mean, it's a wonderful story. It's a fairy tale like story that we don't hear enough of, more in sports that we should hear enough of. You know, played the game just with such energy and heart. I hated when he wasn't a 49er anymore. Of course, the year 2004, they were 2-14. Dennis Erickson, and look, there were changes all over. Offensive coordinator was Ted Tollner. Willie Robinson was the defensive coordinator. On that team, also Dan Quinn was I think was the quarterback coach. Jason Tarver. I'm sorry, Dan Quinn was defensive line. Jason Tarver was the running backs assistant coach. This was a really rough time. General manager was Terry Donahue. It was not. It was a low point. Jeff Garcia was not a 49er anymore. Broke my heart. Tim Rattay was the starter. Ken Dorsey, Cody Pickett. For those of you, if you remember, Cody Pickett was the rodeo star. Okay, so the team now, this was obviously, they were rebuilding, I think. I don't know what you want and what you call it. And there was a lot of talent on this team too, man. There was a lot of, being a 49er nut, there were so many guys on that team that you really enjoyed watching that stuck out. Eric Johnson was one of the guys, okay? Another great story. Drafted out of Yale, 7th-round pick. Okay, he's actually married to Jessica Simpson, for those of you who may or may not be familiar with him. Although, if you watched her show, I think is a reality TV show, you will notice that he is her husband. He had some phenomenal seasons, this being one of them. 82 catches, 825 yards. Unfortunately, he had a lot of injuries during his career. But nonetheless, man, he was great. I really enjoyed watching him play. And this, of course, was a team again with several very very good defensive players, like I mentioned before: Derek Smith, Jeff Ulbrich, Tony Parrish, Ronnie Hurd, Jamie Winborn, the great Brian Young, Jimmy Williams, John Engelberger, Julian Peterson. So, it was tough to watch them go 2-14. But when you're a devout 49er fan, that's what we do. We stick with our squad no matter what. After being part of the 49ers, obviously Garcia goes on to sign with the Cleveland Browns. As a 49er, he had a starting record of 35-36, over 16,000 yards, 113 touchdown passes to 56 interceptions. To me, that's the number that really pops out, or the stat that really pops out, was his touchdowns to interceptions ratio. Okay? Again, extremely cerebral guy, extremely cerebral quarterback, had great eyes, threw that ball threw a bullet. He threw a bullet. So he's with the Cleveland Browns in 2004. 1,731 yards, 10 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Unfortunately, the Browns go 3-7. The year after that, he goes and signs with the Detroit Lions, and then he goes on to the Philadelphia Eagles. 1,309 yards, 10 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Leads them to the playoffs. And then his next stop is with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, okay, where he played for 2 seasons, had a record of 8-5 in his first season. In his second season, he was 6-5, 2007 to 2008. In 2007, some really, really good numbers: 2,440 yards, 13 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Okay, a 94.6 rating. 63.9 completion percentage. And that next season, over 2,700 yards, 12 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Finishes his career with the Philadelphia Eagles, okay, in 2009. Then goes on to play for the Omaha Nighthawks, which were a team in the United Football League, based out of Omaha, Nebraska. So he's making the rounds, man. Canadian League, NFL, United Football League. Okay. Goes on to sign with the Texans in 2011, although I don't believe he played at all there that year. Under head coach Lovie Smith. And then after that, we see him as a coach. And of course, this makes sense. When you have a cerebral player like him who has a wonderful grasp of the position and of the game, yeah, he should be a coach. Okay? He should be a coach. Makes sense. All right. Yeah, in 2014, he was hired as offensive consultant by the Montreal Alouettes of the CFL. Then he was named quarterback coach. In 2015, he was the Los Angeles Rams offensive assistant. He also helped other quarterbacks develop their skills. Worked with several quarterbacks such as Matt McGloin, Mark Sanchez, and Tyrod Taylor. And again, I always felt that Garcia was the perfect guy for young quarterbacks to seek out to work with. There are certain guys in any sport that have retained the knowledge and have that cerebralness of the game, of the position, and knows what it takes to play, that you have to seek out. And there are so many. One guy that should seek him out is Zach Wilson of the New York Jets. If you didn't watch Zach Wilson play this past year, I happened to see him play a lot because I live on the East Coast. But he's got some skills, obviously. And you want to see this kid further develop. Why wouldn't you seek out Jeff Garcia, a guy like that? Now, on saying that, what I'm curious to know is why the 49ers never hired Jeff Garcia as to be a quarterback coach. Now, I don't know why that's never happened. Maybe he probably most likely, may not want the job, maybe whatever the case may be. But I'm just saying, if you've got a kid, if you got a guy you want to develop, and let's face it, they do in Trey Lance, if Trey Lance is going to be the future of this organization, you want him to work with a guy like Jeff Garcia. Again, cerebral, smart, tough, played the game at a different level in a different time, which we don't see today, which a lot of these quarterbacks need to be around and need to be under guys like that to know what it takes to win at a time and in a league when you were able to take the quarterback's head off. That's the guy I'd want. I'd want to learn from him. So obviously, he helps various different quarterbacks. Okay. Like I said, 4-time Pro Bowler, lot of experience in the playoffs. Okay. He's a commentator now. Why not? In my opinion, the best commentators are guys like him that are extremely cerebral. Steve Young, him, Michael Irvin. Okay, guys I really enjoy listening to because they have this great understanding and feel for the game. He knows the team more, obviously. He was a 49er. He knows the team. But, again, one of the guys that just played this game with heart, man. Okay? Very smart guy. Breaks the game down really well. Breaks down the 49ers really well. I think that he would be an absolute asset to Trey Lance again to work with. I would hope that if he is the future and Jimmy Garoppolo is not back as the starter this season, a guy like Lance, who's got a lot of tools, who's got a lot of talent, works with a guy like Jeff Garcia. It can only help. But looking over his career, he had great numbers, man. Looking over his career statistics for the Calgary Stampeders in the CFL, phenomenal numbers. In 4 seasons, 16,442 yards, 111 touchdowns, 52 interceptions, a career rating of 94.9. Ran for over 2,000 yards. One of those seasons, he had 727 yards, 7 touchdowns. Go to the NFL. Okay, in a career that went from 99 to 2009, he threw for over 25,000 yards, 161 touchdowns to 83 interceptions. Ran for over 2,000 yards, had 26 touchdowns on the ground. In that short amount of time, because let's face it, 10 years, I mean, it's a long time in terms of the actual player, but, in the grand scheme of things, I guess that, sometimes it doesn't seem like time never really seems long these days. Everything just seems to be going faster and faster. But in that amount of time, he put up some great numbers. And most importantly, 1, 2, 3, and 5 seasons as a 49, he solidified himself as a legit 49er quarterback and as a player who deserves to be in the 49er greats, not just as a quarterback, but as a player in all talent, all around. He goes in there, and I don't care what anybody says. I always felt he was extremely underrated. That was my opinion. And again, I'm going to say it. For those of you who were not around to see him play, go back. Go back and watch. Always been a favorite of mine, man. I watched him from his career as a starter in the NFL only get better. And this is a guy who had a couple, I don't want to say he had things against him, but maybe the spotlight wasn't there at him like it is for others at first. But let me tell you, man, he sure did shine. He proved himself be well deserving of that 49ers quarterback position. And let's face it, as 49er fans, that's one of the many positions that we hold up high. Which brings me to modern news with our situation right now, which we're all wondering what's going to happen. And I don't want to dedicate this episode to that because I've done enough of that. But just to talk about it briefly, we don't know what's going to happen. We see the various stories always changing about where Jimmy G could be, the teams that are interested, all that. Who knows if that's going to happen? Who knows? We may even bring him back. Who knows? But again, we hold that position very highly. And we've seen this team hit their pitfalls when we didn't have the best player at that position. So, hence be why we hold a guy up like Garcia. Again, one of the many great stories of the NFL. Fairy tale like story, very Kurt Warner like. Had a great run as a 49. Had a great run in the league. Also, too, if you get a chance, check him out on Instagram, man. Dude's in phenomenal shape. Still young, 52, but in phenomenal shape. Always was. Always was in phenomenal shape. So it's always good to see a guy like that take care of themselves physically and be very cognitive mentally. So, yeah, man, the great Jeff Garcia. I got both jerseys, the red and the white. Come on now. You know I don't play. So, this episode again dedicated to the great Jeff Garcia. From time to time, I will be dedicating several episodes to several different players currently playing or in the past. Just something I love to do as a Niner nut because, again, being a Niner, crazy. There have been so many different players that have come and played for this wonderful organization. So many that I mentioned before in Derek Smith, obviously Brian Young, T.O., and some that may not have had the spotlight or whatever. I don't care. I loved watching them play. There were so many special players in this organization. So from time to time, I will be breaking down episodes per player. But you have been hanging with the Niner Nut. I really appreciate you listening. And again, if you haven't had the chance, please go to the YouTube channel and subscribe. I will be pumping out more content in the future as the off season continues along, and it should be exciting and interesting. So please keep an eye on all the news, all things 49ers. This is the Niner Nut. Later.